Good afternoon and welcome everybody. My name is Dawn Campbell. I'm the director at the IAPC&M and you're joining us today for another CPD business building webinar. And as usual in this series, I'm joined by Head of Accreditation, David Monroe-Jones. Hello, David.
Hi, Dawn, and hi, everyone.
So as you can see from the screen, we're at the final stage, the assessment success strategies. That's a bit of a tongue twister, actually. And as all the previous calls have highlighted, everything leads or starts with the contract. So it would be probably a good idea, David, if you could just kick off by quickly going through each of the previous calls in terms of your definition and what our team of assessors are listening out for during the assessment calls for each of those categories, please.
Yep, absolutely. And I think the first thing that I would say is that when people are going through the accreditation, so we provide like a document which identifies what the 10 capability areas are. And one of the most important things is familiarize yourself with those. And I know we're going to come on to more about the success strategies and other things we can do towards the end. But it's worth mentioning that first and foremost, because it rarely happens, but every now and again, you might get somebody who will go through the assessment process and then during feedback might turn around and go, oh, I didn't realize that was one of the elements that you looked at. So it's really, really important to read the documentation. And we always put a note on either in the documentation or the email. If you have any questions, if you have any queries, if you're unsure about something, ask. Because asking at the end of the assessment process is not the best time to ask, or midway through, as the case may be. Okay, so what are we looking for in each of the individual sections? So with regards to the coaching agreement, one of the things that we take for granted is that what I would call big C contracting or the coach agreement has already been done. So the client is fully aware about who you are, what you do, how you do what you do, pricing and everything else. So the initial part of the coaching agreement, that initial part of contracting, is very much about setting the scene. So yeah, reaching agreement on what's going to be covered, possibly identifying a little bit about the structure. Some people like to reference that, certainly for practitioner level, it's a 30-minute session, so they nail the time down. And the contracting is appropriate to the situation. You don't need to spend, certainly in a 30-minute coaching session, 5 to 10 minutes going through all sorts of things about contracting. So within that, recognize that the parameters of the session are important. So if it's a really, really big goal, then you're going to contract and narrow that down. So that's one of the most important things that comes out of the initial coaching agreement piece. The second thing is all about establishing trust and the relationship with the client. And there's if you forgive, like a lot of them, there's a clue in the title there. Can you create a safe and supportive space, based on mutual respect, within the time that you've got between you as a coach and the client, or the person who's assessing? And remember, and it's an important point to stress at this point, it's real play, not role play. So the assessor is genuinely being coached on a genuine issue that is of genuine importance to them. And I make no apology for using genuine 3 times. It's not role play. There are no curveballs. So if a coach asks a question, I'll come back onto this in questioning, and you get a weird and strange answer that comes back, it'll be generated by the question that you've asked, because there's nothing made up. There are no curveballs. There's nothing thrown in there. So establish trust, demonstrate respect for the client, show a genuine interest. If it's a sensitive issue, you might want to ask permission just to probe into that in a little bit more detail. And throughout the coaching session, be curious, be empathetic, so when necessary, demonstrate sincerity, okay, in relation to the client issue. That is the key part about that. If you don't respond, or you don't pick up on the nuances that the client is talking about, then that trust and relationship piece can start to become a little bit fragmented. So genuine interest, the infamous G word again, genuine curiosity, and work in that coaching space, which I'm sure a lot of people will be familiar with from the different type of training that they've received. We then move on to use of self in coaching. Use of self is building on from the trust and the relationship piece to actually be present. Different books refer to this in different ways, but wording that you might find on training courses, in the coaching zone, in the coaching space, in the moment. Coactive coaching, I think, refers to it as dancing with the client. But this is very much about to be present and to be engaged with the client. So you want to be using your own thoughts, and feelings and reactions, to prompt exploration. There is a requirement to be reasonably dynamic, but certainly flexible and fluid to what's coming out from the client. And if there are any issues that are raised through the questioning that you've got at this point, you can confidently deal with them from a coaching perspective. Active listening, the active listening is very much about, can you do what it says on the tin? Can you focus on the client with complete attention? And the key word there is complete attention, not just drifting in and out, not thinking, probably not thinking about what your next question is going to be, or whether you should paraphrase and whether your post-it notes are in the right way, or what's on your shopping list. Can you focus with complete attention and notice and respond to the nuances and the things that come out of the client? So use things like paraphrasing and summarizing to check your understanding, to make sure that you're on the same wavelength and the same page as the client. And importantly, use the client's language to reflect that clarity. And by client's language, there are two things within that. One of them are the words that they use. So if they turn around and say, I find this very exciting, then the word that you want to be using is, I note that you said that you find this very exciting, and you follow up from that. Not that it's fun, not that it's challenging, the word that they use. You might want to challenge what that is. You might want to say, when you say it's exciting, in what way? That's a sort of different question. That more or less comes on to the powerful questioning. And check understanding as well. If you're not sure about something, there's nothing wrong with exploring it further and checking out what's going on. Non-judgmental, no bias, okay, and encourage people to delve as deep as they want to, given the topic of the situation. And sort of counterintuitively, use silence. Okay? So if you ask a client a question and there's a pause, don't feel compelled to stick something in that gap. Sometimes clients need that thinking space, or that space to reflect and ponder what it is that you've asked them. Clearly, if they're still quiet after about 20 minutes, you might want to interject at that point. And especially, just as a quick sidebar, especially in this day where we're doing a lot of things virtually, if you haven't got your camera on or you're doing things over the phone, there's no harm in just checking that the connection is still there. I can personally attest to having a conversation for 5 minutes when the call was dropped about 4.5 minutes ago, and then they come back and say, oh, sorry, what was it, what you were saying? And I'm thinking, well, I've just been asking some of my better questions in those 4 minutes. So, check for all of that. One of the things to watch out for within the active listening piece as well is to listen for the client's preferred modality or preferred preferences. So are they more thinking? Are they more feeling? Are they more kinesthetic? Pick up on those, those wordings. So within that, as an example, if a client is referring to, I think, my thoughts are, then it'll be challenging for them if you ask them, how do you feel about something? The converse is equally true. If somebody tends to speak of, well, my feelings about this, oh yeah, I feel, I have a deep sense. If you ask them how they think, again, some people might find that a little bit more challenging. In some cases, you might want them to do that, but just be aware that you want to be picking up on those key things. And that naturally then leads into the powerful questioning. Powerful questioning is simply the ability to ask the best questions for the maximum benefit of the client and what they're working on. Try not to go through different books, which quite often have, oh, here's a list of powerful questions, because they probably are powerful and or challenging questions or probing questions, depending upon which book you're reading. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it's an appropriate question to ask the client at that given moment in time. So the question is very important that it works this way. You listen, you ask a question, you listen, and then you respond. Okay? You don't ask a question and then think about your next question or have a quick look down your list of, right, what's the next powerful question that I can ask? Because you won't know what that is until you've listened to the client. So it is very important to switch off at that point. Listen. Remember what we said about listening was very much about your complete attention, and then respond accordingly. And that might be responding with another question, or it might be challenge, or it might be paraphrasing. That will totally depend upon where you're at within the session and also sort of what you're doing. Questions should be clear and concise, so that the client totally understands where you're coming from and totally understands what it is that you're asking them. One of our previous webinars raised the point of where you can, you want to be asking the client questions that they don't know the answer to. Things that really provoke them, stimulate them, enhance a different exploration of their thinking processes or generally what's going on in their world. Do not overly use closed or leading questions. You can get away, and I'm using the term get away lightly, with asking a closed question if it's essential at that moment in time and you identify and recognize that it is a closed question. Okay? If you ask a lot of closed questions or leading questions and it's not apparent that you're doing that, then that is certainly one of the indicators that will result in in points being dropped. From there, we move into direct communication, and it really builds on the theme of where we've got to at this point. Direct communication is communicating effectively using appropriate and clear language. So correct tone, pitch, clarity. If a client doesn't understand what you've asked them, don't go into panic mode. Just rephrase the question, because not everybody is always going to understand. Make use of the information and feedback, where applicable. So be specific. Make sure that the communication that is linked to the active listening and the questioning follows the theme of what the client wants to be discussing. Don't get pulled down what I call distraction drive or tangent boulevard. Really hone that communication into what is it that the client needs. At that point, you might want to deliver some feedback or an observation. You might want to challenge, but always, if you do that in be confident in a down-to-earth manner, and it's non-judgmental. By the time we get towards the end of the coaching session, we're really we should be at a point where creating awareness through feedback and challenge has been going on throughout the whole session. This is very much about reflecting a perspective beyond what the client is talking about. So it allows them to become more aware about what's going on. So when you do that, so like you're challenging the client's views about themselves or the situation. And an example of that might be, how else could you view the situation? How might somebody else see this? If you were a fly on the wall looking into this situation, what would that see that you can't see? And it's designed then, so like for this awareness and feedback and challenge, to help the client, really sort of understand what's going on, rather than just doing the sort of tick box of, yeah, I've done this and this is what I'm going to do. You can use at that point feedback. So that might be, from what I've been hearing, one of the things I've noticed is, and then build a question around that. You might suggest that from the areas that you've worked on so far, it would appear that, and then build on from that. So this is very, very much about bringing yourself in again. So your use of self, and identifying and connecting with the client and helping them take those other steps forward. Once we get onto considering options, a lot of people, especially if you're following something like the T-GROW model, and depending upon the amount of time that you normally coach over, options is very much about helping the client to think about, right, this is what I'm working on. What are the options that I've got? You can build on these options all the way through the coaching session. So if a client comes out with certain points at certain parts, there is nothing wrong in just saying to the client, okay, yeah, that seems to be an important point. May I invite you to make a note of it? Some clients like to make notes, some people don't. It's really down to client preference. But it allows you then to help the client to start identifying things as they come up in the moment. So support the client in exploring options that will maximize the opportunity for them to achieve their desired outcome. So that's very much about, what are the alternatives? What are the options? And be cautious of two things. Number one, don't get fixated on the one option that seems to be the panacea of everything, and that's the only thing they're going to do. And number two, don't have so many options that it's almost an impossible choice. Okay? It's not a chocolate box that you're creating. It's a list of options. And realistically, between 3 and 5 is the optimal number. Challenge the client assumptions as well. Especially so if in part of the coaching conversation, you've had a situation whereby they're dealing with something that they've talked about before. They've tried to deal with it before and haven't been successful. So you're asking them questions about, right, well, what did work in the past and what didn't work in the past? And especially if they are still doing the things that they did in the past that they know didn't work, this is when you can come back to the challenge part of, okay, so if it didn't work in the past and it's not working now, what are your reasons for continuing to do it? Yeah, and that's that is an interesting challenge for quite a lot of people. I've forgotten his name. Stephen Hayes, I think it is. So from acceptance and commitment therapy, is very good. So on his therapeutic interventions of just stopping people in their tracks and literally going, so you're doing that and it's not working. So how's that working for you then? Full stop. Well, it's not. Okay, so why are you doing it? Remember, this isn't therapy, but there is a time and a place, for that sort of challenge. The other thing as well is when you're working on the options, you can consider the evaluation part of it. How is that option going to help you to achieve your goal? Remembering that the client overall might have a really big goal, but what you're working on here is the goal for this specific session that you only have 30 minutes to achieve. So one of the things within the options and linking back to the goal is, right, did I narrow down as a coach, did I get them to really hone in on something specific that I can deal with within 30 minutes? And the analogy that I would give give for this, and it's one that I've used recently, is it's a bit like going out to do your garden. And you think, right, you're like, I've got all of my garden to do. I've got all the, especially this time of year, I've got all the tidying up to do to get it ready to, you're like, just hibernate over the winter period. It's going to take me around about 5 hours to do, depending upon the size of your garden. And you then look and you go, right, well, I've only got 2 hours. So there's no way I can do all of the garden. What can I achieve realistically in 2 hours? And then work back. If I only had 30 minutes to do something in my garden, what would I focus on? So this is the importance of, if you haven't narrowed down the goal at the beginning, you can end up like with either options that aren't going to fit, or too many options, or occasionally some sort of weird things that tend to come out. Weird things is not a technical coaching term, I hasten to point out. Action planning is only effective if you've done the options correctly. If you've got bad options, you haven't got a good action plan. It'll look nice, but ultimately it's not going to work. And the action plan is simply a coaching plan with the client, or a way forward. I have a phrase that I use a lot in feedback, and that is very much, who must do what, by when, to what standard, and for what reason. So breaking that down, who has to do what? Predominantly that's, what is the client going to do? What are the actions that they're going to take? The actions that will really address the issue, and the actions that are going to make a difference. When are they going to do it? And that is, when are they going to start? When does it need to be completed by? The aspect of to what standard is sort of optional. I like to ask that because I like people to understand that there's a quality element to what it is that they're going to do. But for what reason links it back to the overall goal. So if you've asked questions at the outset, such as what's the impact of doing nothing, what would be the impact on your life if nothing changed in the next 3 to 6 months? How would it feel? What would be going on for you? And they're going, life would be awful, it would be terrible. Then this action planning piece of, what's the reason that you're doing this is, well, to make sure that I'm not in this situation in 3 to 6 months' time. You want to support them. So some of the things that you want to ask within that people tend to miss out are, and in fairness, these are, again, some of the things that you might want to have addressed as you've gone through it. What's going to get in the way? Barriers, hurdles, distractions, handbrakes, as one of our other coaches calls them, so that you can understand how they might get in the way. But also, by this stage, you may have already started to say, well, okay, how are you going to overcome them? How are you going to prevent that from impacting the actions that you're going to take? The other question that's often missed, who can support you? Who can support you? Who else? And in support, what exactly are they going to support you with? How are they going to be able to help you? And then you have the final bit. This is I was going to say nail in the coffin there, but that would have been a totally inappropriate word. And now that I've said that, I can't get it out of my head and think of another one. But this is the key bit. This is where the rubber hits the road, as many Americans might say. The ability to hold the attention of the client on what's important and leave responsibility with them to act, managing progress and accountability. So back to that previous question, who's going to do what by when? The client is going to do it. There is absolutely nothing wrong, in my opinion, of saying, and who is responsible for getting this done? I am. I'm responsible. I'm accountable. I'm the client, right? And what is the impact of not doing it? Well, I think things will generally fall apart. Fine, and they're short, concise questions, but they just nail the client down to getting action. Something that is really important at this point as well is get the client to identify what it is that they're going to do. try not to get into the habit of summarizing for the client by going, okay, so what you've said you're going to do is this, 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 and this, and you've said you're going to do it by when, and you say you're going to do it to this standard, because the client will simply go, and I know this because if it was me, I would say it, would go, yeah, that's about right. Yeah, with no accountability whatsoever, because yeah, I haven't made any notes, I haven't kept a record of it. So get the client to do that. So as you're going through the coaching session, at key points, if something comes out, and this is especially important, bearing in mind the assessment is for 30 minutes, and you may normally coach for a lot longer than that, then the client might not remember. Even in 30 minutes, they might not remember what they've said, simply because you're asking them questions all the time. So when key pieces come out and they say, yeah, what I need to do is get them to make a note of it so that they understand I'm accountable for that. That's one of my options. That's the action point. That's when I'm going to do it by. Okay? And the reason I'm doing it is it's going to give me this. You can challenge the responses as well. So if there are issues or learning points, that might be things like, you mentioned earlier that is something that you've tried. How likely is it to be successful this time? And you can get into that conversation. Now, throughout the coaching session, the likelihood is that you'll have explored with them, things that they've done before, things that they've worked on. You might also be asking about their commitment, which I'm always fond of asking right at the beginning. Sometimes within the assessment process, you can ask at the end, and it's often encouraged in some training, ask you a question at the end: how motivated are you to do this? How committed are you? How enthusiastic? Whatever word you want to put in there. A word of caution. If you ask that question right at the end, or certainly when you haven't got much time left at the end of the coaching session, and they come out with a number that you're not expecting, i.e. middle of the road towards low, you haven't got any time to deal with it. You haven't got any time to explore what the issue is. So if you're going to use scaling questions like that, then midway to 3/4 of the way through, as a checkpoint. It's not something that we particularly score within the assessment process, but finish off professionally. Thank you very much for your time. I've really enjoyed working with you and serving you, in the time that we've got. The little bit of role play that often comes at this point might be, I look forward to our next session in 3 weeks' time, 2 weeks' time, whatever it may be. But that's not critical. It's usually by this time, once you've said, thank you very much, I wish you well, then the assessor at that point is usually saying, thank you very much, I'm now going to pause and stop the recording. And then that's it. So, and I say that's it with a degree, so a degree of understanding about, sometimes you're looking at the 10 areas and all the bits that are in there, can seem daunting. And if I was going through it for the first time, and both Dawn and I and all of the senior leadership team have been through similar, if not different processes, so we understand what it's like. So I'm sure Dawn's got some comments, and I'm sure there are some other things come out. There are some key things to think about that I'm sure Dawn and I will discuss in a minute, that also help you with this process. But that is, that is the things that we actually look for. What I would add is that there are 10 areas. There are a maximum of 3 points allocated to each of the areas. So there is a maximum score of 30 right across the board, no matter what level you're going for. So practitioner, senior, master, fellow, the maximum score you can get is 30. At practitioner level, our level for a pass is 70%. So we have high standards because we have high expectations. That means you need to achieve a minimum of 21 out of 30. And those of you who are mathematically orientated, and that does not include me, I stress, okay, will work out, well, if I have to score a maximum of 21 and I only score 2 for each one, then I'm not going to pass. So you have to score at least 3. So yeah, within a number of different sections rather, in order to gain your pass. And we look at it from a simple process. 0 is not demonstrated, and 3 is clearly and convincingly demonstrated. So if you demonstrate something clearly and convincingly, and you really get to the core of it, and and everything else, you will score maximum points. Okay, if you don't, you won't. It's there is no other way than that simple, like black and white rule, and that is very similar to like taking your driving test or a pilot's license, which came up in a conversation I was having this morning, which was a bit weird, but nevertheless, it's exactly the same. So there is a set criteria, there is a pass mark. If you achieve that convincingly, if you go out on your driving test and you drive well and you do everything you're supposed to do, then you will pass. If you happen to mount the curb, or clip another car or run someone over, including the driving instructor, I suppose, then it's likely that it's not likely that you're going to fail. So you will fail. And we can talk about what the implications are of anybody who fails the assessment process. But I'm mindful that I've been talking probably a lot longer than I should have done. So I'm going to pause now and have a drink as well.
That was excellent. Thank you, David. That was a really comprehensive overview. Perhaps when you've wet the whistle, you could just finish the marking and let us know for a senior, a master and a fellow, what are the pass marks for those, please?
Okay, yeah, sure. So it's exactly the same model in terms of the 10 capability areas. As you move from senior to master to fellow, there are some additional indicators that we would look for. So that's one of the things. The pass mark for senior level is 75%. The pass mark for master is 80%, and the pass mark for fellow is 85%. So by the time you get up to fellow level, we are really looking for, if I was going to look at it bluntly, we're looking for 3s across the board. We're looking for clearly and convincingly demonstrating excellence in coaching in all of these, all of these different areas. One of the things with that as well is that, when my mouth and my brain actually catch up with each other, one of the things just to bear in mind is that if you apply for practitioner level and you score, let's say 77%, we will not be awarding you the senior coach accreditation. And there are 2 reasons for that. One of them is that we are assessing you against the criteria for practitioner, not the criteria for senior. And secondly, there are a whole host of other things that would be going with that as well. So you could, and we have had people apply practitioner level and score 100%. Yeah, that will still give you your practitioner level accreditation. And probably a lot of accolades from us as well, going, that was brilliant, that was outstanding. It's a flawless performance. Equally, if somebody doesn't achieve the pass mark, we are very, very keen to provide support and guidance and feedback in order to help people understand what it is that might have caused a problem, or an area that you can further develop.
So what you're saying,
the other thing I should mention is, the other thing I should perhaps mention is that as well as the scoring for senior upwards, the timing changes as well. So a senior level assessment is 40 minutes, a master level assessment is 50 minutes, and a fellow level assessment is 60 minutes. Mm-hmm. And you might think that, that's easier because I've got more time to to fit in all of these boxes. You could think that. I would strongly advocate not thinking that, because it doesn't quite work that way, because you're still managing the same amount of time of, I've got a period of time for the introduction, I've got then the main body of the coaching session, then I've got the options and the action points and the accountability that comes at the end. So what you generally find with that is it follows the same sort of structure. You just might be working on things so like at a deeper level for a longer period.
And so if somebody applies for master level, and just thinking about your point that if somebody got 100%, it doesn't bump them up to becoming a fellow, they're still a practitioner accreditation. Conversely, if somebody gets less than 85%, they don't drop their status to master when they apply for fellow. How does that work, David?
Yeah, so the pass mark that is set is sort of like very robust. So using sort of like the fellow as an example, pass mark is 85%. So if they score 84% or below, then fundamentally, so like at that point, so like it's a fail on that part of the assessment. The reason that we don't drop people down to master level is first and foremost that they applied for so like fellow level, and that would indicate that as part of our assessment process that's come before that, when we've looked at their documentation and their training and the capability interview that they'll have had, that they have enough evidence to support that they can apply for so like for fellow level. Secondly, they've been assessed at the fellow level status, not the not the master coach status. And thirdly, the process that we go through of going back to somebody and saying, you know, unfortunately on this occasion you haven't quite achieved the requirement of fellow coach in this case, so like that we would look for, and we provide all of the so like the feedback and the guidance and the support. What we tend to find is that people find that process incredibly beneficial. They learn a massive amount from it. Because there's a requirement for everybody at every level to complete a personal reflection after the assessment anyway. They then go away, they work on the areas that we've identified, they probably practice it with, you know, either study buddies or colleagues or peers, or, you know, in some cases they just go away and work with clients, you know, like a lot more. And then when they come back and they have their reassessment, they usually sail through, you know, like with I think, if memory serves, only one exception to that rule across the board where somebody's had to take more than one reassessment. But generally speaking, when people come back, you know, they are, you're like significantly improved. And what that allows us to do then is to say, look, on this occasion, again, you know, going back to the driving test analogy, on this occasion, you didn't quite reach the standard. And in the same way that a driving instructor doesn't go, well, you're like, you failed on this occasion, do you want to learn how to drive a moped? You know, because you're like, that's, you're like perhaps a little bit easier. And they go, no, you're like, I want to drive a car. The same thing is true. I've got the experience for this. I understand that on this occasion, you're like, I perhaps didn't coach as well as I could have done. I'm happy to go away, you're like, and practice these other things and come back and demonstrate that I can do what I say I can do. And at all levels, people do get a little bit, you're like, nervous. You know, even the most experienced people, when you say, right, it's a coaching assessment, you are being assessed against, you know, these criteria. And even with it being real, you know, there is still that, well, you're like, at the back of your mind, or even at the forefront of your mind, is it's real, it's being recorded, and ultimately I'm being assessed to see if I'm a good enough coach to be accredited at, you know, whatever level it is within the IAPC&M. You know, and I, you know, if it was me, I would be exactly the same. I would be, you know, like, conscious of, you know, like, of that. So the important thing around that, about, you know, just going back to, you know, like, why we don't move things around, is that we have a set standard for each level, and people apply for that, and, you know, we work with them to it. If, and it's incredibly rare, but it does happen, if somebody so like looked at the criteria and they'd applied for, let's say they'd applied for master level, but they misunderstood what the requirements were, you know, for whatever reason, and then came back and said, oh, I've only got X number of hours, then in that case, before we even started the accreditation application process, we would go back to them and say, well, look, based on what you've said and based on that understanding, our recommendation would be that you would go for senior level. So there's the conversations that we have with people beforehand sort of allows them then to make an informed decision about, you know, like what's best for them.
Great, thank you. And certainly from the feedback that we've had in the last 2 years, members, even members who don't succeed first time round, have given us amazing testimonial feedback to say that they learned so much from the assessor's feedback that they wish they had learned at their coaching academy. It's given them a massive boost to their confidence about the areas to plug and so on. And conversely, when they do pass, their feedback has showed that this isn't about ticking a box, like, you know, I've got my coaching certificate, now I get my insurance certificate, now I get my accreditation. It's not that at all. It's a real experience that is a massive boost of confidence in terms of the capability to deliver what the client needs. And that's what you'll see when you look at the website in terms of member reviews. It's all about the experience. And of course, that's one of the reasons why our members are so proud to be part of the IAPC&M family, because they have this sense of achievement. They feel that they really do belong to the 1% club. And as David said, you know, nerves are going to play a part. And again, that's why we should be so proud of our achievement. Nobody has to go through accreditation. Increasingly, it's a differentiator that the public are asking for, but you're doing it voluntarily. So remember why you're putting yourself through this experience, so that you can be a better coach for your clients and feel proud of your achievement. And as David said, it's an authentic situation. Hence, we don't do the role plays, so that you get comfortable in the call as quickly as possible, because it's real time, real issues. So David, if somebody is borderline, how would you handle that? You mentioned somebody might be 84% or even 85%. Is that still borderline? How would you handle it?
Yeah, the borderline is one of those words that's, well, what exactly do you mean by, like by borderline? So somebody who's a borderline pass would be, if it was APC, so like practitioner level, well, in fact, so like for any of the levels, it's when you score exactly the percentage that's required as a pass, and possibly maybe 1% more than that. So if you scored somewhere between 70 to 72%, if you scored 75 to 77, if you scored 80 to 82, and so on and so forth. That's indicating that you've passed, but there are maybe some areas that you might want to work on, a little bit more. So what we do in that situation is we still, because you've achieved the pass mark, so you will still be awarded your accreditation. But what we ask is, we ask you to go through the feedback that's been given by the assessor, to review the most important parts. So the capability assessment, so we'll have your score on there and have all of the wording about, right, you might want to work on this and have a look at that, and you did this rather than that, and you did that, that was great, and so on and so forth. And then within that, we ask you, right, identify somewhere between 3 and 5 key learning points from the feedback that you've received from the assessor, put those onto your CPD log, which we provide you with, and send it back to us so that we know that you have taken on board the feedback from the assessor and you're going to do something with it. And then that sort of tidies up the assessment process. So you still get your certificate and your logo and everything else. There's just a little bit of work that comes before that. And we head that as a simple wording called action required. Okay. Now, because there are generally exceptions to all rules, the exception to that rule is if somebody scores highly, and sort of sails past the pass mark, but they score 0 in any one of the 10 areas. If that was the case, even if let's say, for example, that somebody's going for practitioner, they score 90%, but in one of those areas there's a 0. let's say, for example, so like that was in active listening for whatever reason, we would be coming back to you at that point as well and saying, yes, you've scored 90%. However, you did not demonstrate your effective active listening at any point, like throughout, the coaching session, and therefore, we require you to, to do some work on that. It's rare, but it does happen. If it's going to happen, then it's likely to happen around options, action planning, and managing accountability. They tend to be the areas that coaches do sort of very well on the run up towards that, but then tying it together and nailing it down. If people are going to make some mistakes or miss something out, it's generally around that area. In the main. So if you scored 0 for managing accountability, but you scored you scored 27 points across the board on the others, and please don't ask me to work out what that percentage is, then you would still be getting, even though you got 27 out of 30, you'll still be getting action required because you didn't score any points on this area, and that is something that you need to work on. We're quite robust on that. So if we ask for your CPD log and we don't get it, we will chase you for it. And bear in mind that we can suspend accreditations where necessary. Not that we ever have, certainly not in this situation, but it's an important consideration. We have a set of standards for a reason, and I would say our accreditation is probably the most comprehensive, the most holistic, the most realistic that's available within the coaching world. So there's a reason why we do things like that.
Which leads me nicely on to the question, which is around the capabilities model. We changed from a competencies model. So perhaps you could just explain the rationale behind that, please, David.
Yeah, it's quite a long story, which I will, because Christmas is coming up next week, so I'll make it incredibly short. But basically, a lot of organizations, and not just coaching organizations, have competency models. I'm trained in competency design myself, so I understand the benefits of those. And the IAPC&M, as it was in its previous guises, had a competency model as well, very similar to a lot of the other awarding bodies. And one of the things that we became aware of was an article from Oxford Brookes University, which was talking about the move from a competency-based model to a capability-based model. And cutting a long story short, we were interested in that. We contacted Oxford Brookes. We gained permission to use their model. We went away, we tweaked it, we amended it, we changed it. I would argue we made it better. In fact, I would state that we made it better. We made it more applicable, for the different levels that we've got. We changed a number of things within it around the percentage areas. And we ended up with the 10 capability areas that we've got. One of the issues around competencies is that competencies can be incredibly detailed. And within a coaching code, you can't guarantee that you will always cover all of the nuances of that specific competency. But with a capability model, you can, okay? Because a capability model simply says, right, are you capable of doing these things? And what we find with the capability model is that it provides a much more holistic view of the coaching session and the coach and what they're capable of doing. It's easier to work through. It's easier to score. It's easier to recognize where these behaviors are without having, in some cases, some of the competency areas on other models had about 8, 9, or 10 different subsections or different indicators, and it's incredibly difficult to identify what that is when you're listening to a call. So the capability model is a much more robust way of just getting to the core of what's important. So you can say, right, direct communication, great. What is that? It's the ability to communicate effectively with a client. Fantastic. What are we looking for? What are the behaviors that we're looking for within that? We're looking for this, this, and this. Great, fantastic. And what would be the contra indicators be? What would be the things that would indicate that they're not doing this well? Oh, that would be this, this, and this. And it just allows us to have something that's much more realistic. It's flexible because you can tailor it, you can move it without necessarily worrying about, right, like, does this need to be, you know, like another sort of like competence or something like that. And the other thing within that as well is that it's the language that is used within the capability model generally makes sense. Okay, so if you've got something that simply says establish the coaching agreement, it's relatively straightforward that capability means that you establish the coaching agreement. It doesn't have some sort of convoluted like title attached to it. Can you establish trust within the relationship? Powerful questioning, understand that. Active listening, understand that. Management, so like manage accountability and progress, I understand that. So it allows us to encourage coaches to think about like the things that are important within a coaching session. It's flexible and it's dynamic as well. So like we review it like every now and again, like to see whether it's working. Everybody so like who's gone through this process has generally turned around and said the process, the different areas, the feedback that they get has been incredibly beneficial, from a coaching perspective. I mean, so like one recently that for somebody who was just assessed this week, they just came back and went wow, superb, thanks very much for the feedback and everything else, time to celebrate.
And I think the same is also said of the training providers, because it's a holistic approach. It's much more inclusive, which means it doesn't necessarily exclude people who think, oh, I'm not very academic. We're in the business of having a conversation. It is not rocket science. That's why capabilities are so much more important. Can you actually deliver what you say you're capable of delivering and reassure the client? And that's why I love this model so much more than the old competencies model. It seems funny, actually, David, on reflection, that we've spent 12 hours or so with some great host guest speakers and some questions from listeners, and the feedback we've had for this series has been phenomenal, actually, even from existing coaches, that they've learned so much. It's almost been a refresher. So we've spent 11 hours talking about this for what is essentially a 30, 40 or 50-minute assessment call. Why did we even put together this series, do you think?
We put the series together to provide just that, like exactly what you've said, which is, look, we're not here just to say, right, like that's what it is, get on with that. The essence of what we've always said is that like coaching, mentoring, training, it's a relationship business. So it's important for us to be able to reach out and say, right, this is the support that you've got. And within the CPD calls, it was very important really to say, look, we're not just going to leave you hanging, like wondering like that's the criteria, what do I need to do? We'll support you by like giving you some hints and tips about not just what you need to do for the assessment, in the accreditation process, but things that will help you to be a better coach, like period, so like full stop, like going forward. And a lot of the things that we talk about, will work in some situations and not in others, and as people become more experienced, they start to recognize that. People will start to pick up on, like a good question that I could use here. And that sort of period of reflections, the piece that we send after the accreditation, reflect on, you say, what was the topic about, what went well, what didn't go so well, what have you learned, how will you apply that in the future? Although it wasn't necessarily a specific CPD call, people start to recognize that, when I finish a coaching call and I reflect and I can look at what I've done, I can link that to these, to these calls. It also means that, people can just, they can pick and choose. which which one they want to listen to. So if people are comfortable with the coaching agreement and everything else, but they've got a bit of an issue about I could really do with honing my skills on progress and accountability, they can go back and listen to that and see what other people are saying and practice those techniques, be it be it with peers, be it with friends. In some cases we are practicing what we learn with clients because there's nobody else we can do it with, and that's real. And I think so. The other reason that we did it was to say, look, this is what we've done around this, and there is so much more that we're going to be doing, in order to provide a supporting framework, for people, to grow and to become the best coaches that they can be, both for themselves, but ultimately for their clients, and therefore for the wider community, so that clients who work with IAPC&M, accredited, coaches, mentors, training providers, they might not recognize the difference if they haven't been anywhere else, but they just know that they're working with a true professional, who actually really knows what they're doing, and kept at the core of it,
and is there for the lifelong journey of our members, Yeah, definitely. Okay, thank you for that. Obviously, people are challenging themselves to go through the accreditation process. We've already said it's not mandatory in the industry. It's an extra. It's an increasing differentiator that the public are asking for. Another part of the accreditation process for some people is the interview, and that can be just as scary. So if you could say a few words around who gets interviewed and a little bit about it, please.
Yeah. So at practitioner level, the capability interview is for anybody who applies for accreditation who hasn't come through one of our recognised IAPC&M training providers. For everybody, no matter which route you've taken, at senior level, master level and fellow level, everybody undertakes a capability interview. It's the same timing as it is for the assessment. So 30 minutes at practitioner level, 40 at senior, 50 at master, and 60 at fellow. There is a small caveat that I always say within that interview, which is if you talk a lot, it'll be slightly longer, and if you don't talk much, it'll be slightly shorter. But generally speaking, that's the timing. The interview is designed to understand three key areas. Firstly, to understand your commitment to professional development, so your commitment to CPD. So, what's your approach to CPD? What do you do? What are your learning and development objectives for the next 12 months? Those sort of things. It looks at your underpinning experience and knowledge. So, what model do you tend to use? What methodology? What approach? So that might be, you might use Tigro, or you might use predominantly SMART, or you might use law of attraction, or you might use any of the other myriad of models that are out there. And then the last part is a discussion about reflection. So how and when do you reflect? What do you do with the information that comes from that? The piece that's missing is the behavioral piece. From our more holistic model of how this all comes together, and the behavioral piece is what we assess during the coaching call. So the interview, and I always encourage the assessment team. So when you're doing the interview, start off by telling people, look, although it's called an interview, it's more of a conversation. It doesn't allow too much two-way conversation, because it has to be fair and equal for all. So people get asked the same questions in the same order, more or less in the same way. But the four pieces that come together then form the model. So ultimately what you have is your underpinning knowledge and experience impacts your behavior, which we assess during the coaching assessment or mentoring assessment. From there, you reflect on what's happened. From there, you decide, right, what else do I need to do from a professional development point of view? That then becomes and enhances your underpinning knowledge and understanding, which then impacts your behavior, and that then creates the model. The important thing about that model is that, and the way that we design it the way that we've had it designed, so like it shows as cogs. So when one cog turns, all of the cogs turn. Is that if you stop one cog, everything stops. So as an example, if during this sort of the capability interview, we're talking about reflection, and somebody might turn around and go, reflection's not something that I do because I can't see the point of it, that would stop that cog. Would equally mean that they wouldn't score any points on on that specific section, which would cause a problem. But it also means that from training events or seminars or any part of the CPD, they're not reflecting on it to see what matters, how it makes a difference. If they're not doing that, they can't impact their future CPD. If they're not doing that, they're not enhancing and growing their underpinning knowledge and understanding. If they're not doing that, it's not being translated into the behaviors they have with other people. So it's one of those, it looks complicated, as I've said to somebody recently, it looks complicated when you just look at it, but when you break it down, it's actually quite simplified.
Thank you.
But I would say that because I've sort of lived with it. I've lived with it for the past 4 to 5 years. So
I think the key thing out of all of this, and you have touched on it a couple of times, David, is we want personality to come through. We're holistic, we're inclusive, it's a conversation, be yourself. And people get themselves a little bit over anxious, but, relax and enjoy it if it's at all possible. Remember to breathe and use your personality. We're not looking for perfectionism, and we're not looking for clones. Everybody is different, and we appreciate that, don't we?
Yeah, absolutely. And what I would add to that as well is that it doesn't matter what model you use. Whether it's Tigro, Clear, Smart, like any of your Oscar, like any of the myriad of other ones that are out there.
Or you make your own up.
Yeah, or you can make. I mean, one of the exercises I encourage people: take your name, take the first letters of your name, create a model from that. It's great fun. If you've got a lot of Z's in your name, so it might be a little bit of a challenge, but who doesn't like a challenge? The other thing as well, a couple of things really important. Don't try and be something you're not. So don't try and impress us, because the assessment team will just see through that straight away. And very similar to if you ever watch Great British Bake Off, okay? Yeah, have you practiced doing this before? No. So why are you doing it? Why would you do it in an assessment? Yeah, just out of curiosity. Yeah, do what you know works. Yeah, all we're asking you to do fundamentally is you have 30 minutes for practitioner level to conduct a coaching session in the way that you coach. So there we and that's it. So always be yourself. Do what you do best. And we'll go from there.
Thank you. Well, just before we wrap up, I want to share a message. We had a brand new listener on the call today, David, called Wendy. She says she's a vocational evaluator, and I complete assessments with clients. I work for the state of North Carolina, and I would like to thank you for allowing me to attend this webinar. I have listened, I have reflected, and I have learned from your webinar. I have benefited from attending this webinar. This is great quality training. Keep up the great work. Sincerely, Wendy. I have to attend another webinar now, so bye-bye. But that kind of summed it up beautifully. So well done, David.
Yeah, that's really nice.
Yeah, definitely. And our time has come to an end, our 12 hours over the course of the year. And what fun. I mean, the feedback, as I say, has been phenomenal, with people writing in saying that was fun. I learned a lot, and we've had some laughs, and yeah, it's been a great refresher. So thank you very much for your very valuable input, David. And I would like to announce our new CPD series for next year, commencing on the third Monday of every month. So it's going to be Monday, the 18th of January, always at 11 o'clock, with our lovely head of education, Nikki Wild. She is going to bring to life her 12-step self-teach e-program called, aptly, the business of coaching. And we'll explain more about that in January as to why it came about. But that is, you know, this series has all been about the capability, helping you become a better coach. Next year's series is all about helping you to develop your business acumen so you can actually have a coaching thriving practice. So let me just check, because we've got another message just pinged in. Oh, thank you. Just more thank yous. It's been a great series. So yeah, well done, David, for being in the hot seat every single call. It's been very much appreciated. And it will be Nikki and I and head of CPD, Ruby Maguire, hosting you next year. So in the meantime, stay safe, everybody. Have a fabulous festive family break where possible. It's obviously not going to be a traditional one this year, but it's nevertheless going to be a very well-earned break.
Yeah, and I would just endorse that. You know, to everyone, thank you for your support, your listening. I wish you the very best for whatever you get up to over the festive period, and the very best for 2021. And you know, in the hope that it is a better year for everyone, and by everyone I mean globally.
Yeah, thank you very much. Bye bye, everybody.
Thank you.